Okay, this is for all my married peeps out there or people that live with their significant other. Do you ever have a problem with like sharing your food with your partner? I never want to share. So, like, I have a stash of certain kinds of foods because I buy them so often that I like to buy a bunch of them all at once so that I never run out. And one of those foods is rice cakes. Like, it's a carb, I can eat it, it's very easy to make. I can just, fit it with a protein and there's my macros. So I have a bunch of rice cakes in my drawer in my kitchen. And Dan is always like, "Can I have one of your rice cakes?" And I'm like, no, go buy your own. Like, get your own. Because he would keep asking me, "Can I have a rice cake? Can I have one of your rice cakes?" I'm like, no, buy your own. Those are mine. And so he finally started buying his own rice cakes and like putting them in his drawer. And he would eat he'd eat like 2 or 3, and then a couple days later they're gone. And he'll be like, "Oh, I'm out of rice cakes. Can I have one of your rice cakes?" And I'll be like, "Why didn't you buy more before you ran out?" So I guess I did not learn how to share, but I just have this thing where I just don't like sharing my food, my stash. I have like a rice cake emergency fund, so I never run out. I have like all the different kinds and just a bunch of them stacked up in my kitchen. But it's funny because, Dan and I have been together for 4.5 years, and we've been living together for 2 years. And it's, we're practically married. I hesitate to say that because I know there's probably like a huge difference between just living together and being married. So I get that we're not married, but we kind of act married. I used his last name on my book, and we're committed and everything, but I just don't like to share my food, and I don't know if that would change after we get married. But I remember hearing like Dave Ramsey talk on his money show about marriage. Like occasionally he'll slip in, his Christian insight on money related topics, and he's always encouraging people to get married if they're together. He's always like pushing for the benefits of marriage. And there was a point in my life where I was very skeptical about that, but the more I think about it, I'm like, okay, like the most successful, the happiest people that I know are actually married. And Hollywood and everything will try to convince you otherwise. But, people that are successful, happy, they're married. They make that commitment. But I was thinking like, Dave Ramsey says when you're married, it's not you and me. It's not me and you. It's not yours and mine. It's ours. And so like if Dan and I get married, which we will get married, we just don't have a date. We haven't picked a date yet. It's not going to be my rice cakes and his rice cakes. It's going to be our rice cakes. And there's like this part of my brain that's like, no, it's my rice cakes. Like, get your own. And like I do that in a lot of areas. It's like, no, that's mine. That's mine. You can't drive my car. That's my baby. You can't. So it just got me thinking like this idea of sharing. I really don't like to share. I like to give, but there's a difference between like giving and sharing. Sharing feels kind of like obligatory, like you're back in childhood and your parents are like, share your toys, and you don't want to share. And I like the idea of owning something and it's separate from what other people own. And if you want to give one to them, great, but like sharing just feels kind of like Does anyone else feel me on that? Like, is that just me? I just wasn't taught to share. I mean, my mom will offer you everything. She'll be like, help yourself to this, help yourself to that. So, she didn't she was not like stingy with stuff, but my dad was kind of the opposite. So maybe I picked it up from him. Maybe that's where I got it. In our family growing up, like everybody always put their name on their food, and if somebody else ate their food, they'd get pissed. And so it's like, identifying what's mine. And yeah, I just don't like sharing the rice cakes. But what does this relate to business? Business, I'm a big fan of giving in business, giving free value before you ever ask anyone for a single dollar. That's a really great business practice. And I covered that in my first book, the Anti-Marketing Manifesto, How to Sell Without Being a Sellout. So giving is good karma, and there's a way to do it correctly where you're not like being attached to some kind of outcome, or you're not giving out of a sense of obligation. You're just giving to genuinely help someone because you want to. And you're not giving in a way that destroys you, but you're actually giving in a way that like creates more energy in you and in the recipient, the person who's receiving it. And there's lots of different ways to give in your business, which I also cover in my book. And that's very good for business. Sharing is not really good for business. Like, why would I share something with you? Why would I share a part of my stash with you? I could give you a part of it, or I could give you a piece of it. That's very different from sharing. Sharing is like obligation. We don't want that. So, I'm not a fan of sharing. I'm a fan of giving. And giving is also great when it comes to the MEI principle, motivate, educate, inspire. So when you give content, when you give great content that it doesn't even, like the word content almost doesn't even do it justice, because you're giving from your heart. You're like, showing people this part of you, etc. You're like giving them your insight and your wisdom. That's different from like sharing something. I don't know, maybe I'm reaching, but it's just funny. I thought I would share that. So that is probably something that only the married people / people living together would relate to. But let me know if you relate to that. Like, or are you just so kind-hearted and so wonderful that you just share everything with your significant other or your family or whoever? I mean, to me, that seems like bad boundaries, but I don't know. So yeah,